All right, let's dive into the wild world of Chinese smartphones. It's an incredible story of how a few companies completely took over their home turf and then started to take on the globe. And they did it with a secret strategy that, honestly, you might not even realize exists. So let's get into it. So you've probably seen these names floating around, right? You see a familiar brand, maybe Huawei, but then the phone is called an Honor. Or Xiaomi, but then you see Redmi everywhere. Are these like new competitors, some kind of spin-off? It's confusing, and that's actually by design. Today, we're gonna untangle this whole thing. The thing is, these aren't separate companies just fighting for a piece of the pie. They are custom-built weapons in a much bigger war for who gets to dominate the market. They're called sub-brands, and once you understand what they are and how they're used, the entire Chinese tech scene starts to make a whole lot more sense. But to really get why this strategy was such a game changer, we have to rewind the clock a bit, back to when the smartphone world looked very, very different. Think back to before 2011. If you were buying a phone in China, the market was pretty much owned by foreign giants. Nokia, Apple, Samsung. The local brands, what they called the old guard, were really just seen as the cheap option. Their only selling point was the low price, and they often came with that, let's say, reputation for Chinese quality. But then, out of nowhere, a new startup shows up. And this company wasn't just trying to be the cheapest kid on the block. Nope, it was trying to be the smartest. So check this out. In 2010, Huawei is still playing the old game, pushing out super cheap phones. But in 2011, a startup called Xiaomi, led by this really charismatic guy named Lei Jun, saw this huge gaping hole in the market that everyone else was ignoring, that mid-range sweet spot. And that one move, it basically lit a fuse that was about to blow up the entire industry. Xiaomi's whole philosophy was built on this super simple but really smart idea. They called it the 80-80 rule. The goal wasn't to build the fanciest phone with every feature under the sun. Instead, it was to build a phone that would make 80% of people just the right features at just the right price. No fat, no waste. In Xiaomi's first phone, it was a smash hit. I mean, an absolute blockbuster. And you better believe the established giants, especially Huawei, were forced to scramble and react like immediately. Just 3 months after Xiaomi launched its first phone, Huawei drops the Ascend Honor. And I mean, look at these two. Pretty similar, right? But Huawei had this hidden superpower. Xiaomi was a startup. They just couldn't build phones fast enough for everyone who wanted one. So Huawei, with its massive manufacturing muscle, just swooped right in and sold its lookalike phone to all those frustrated customers left waiting in line. But just copying wasn't going to cut it, and Huawei knew it. They had to change, like fundamentally. The founder brought in a new chief who made this insane decision. He killed their entire feature phone business overnight. That was a 30 million unit hit. It was a massive gamble, and at first, it was a total disaster. Their new smartphones were so buggy that the founder supposedly threw one at the new chief's head. Huawei's market share just plummeted to 4%. It was a total near-death experience for them. But sometimes, from the ashes of failure, you forge your greatest weapon. And that's exactly what Huawei did. And that weapon? The sub-brand. Now, what is that? It's actually a pretty simple idea. A big parent company creates a second, totally distinct brand so it can go after a different kind of customer. This way, the main brand can stay all premium and high-end, while the sub-brand can go get its hands dirty in the more price-sensitive fights. The best way to think about this is probably with a brand you already know, Uniqlo. As Uniqlo started getting more expensive and focusing on higher quality, it didn't want to lose all its younger, trendier, more budget-conscious shoppers. So what did they do? They created GU, a sub-brand all about lower prices and fast fashion styles. That way, Uniqlo gets to be premium, but they still own the mass market. This is the exact playbook. So Xiaomi actually jumped on this first, creating Redmi to go after the low-cost market. And Huawei quickly followed, turning its Honor line into its own sub-brand. And on the surface, you're probably thinking, okay, here we go, Huawei's just copying them again. But you'd be wrong. This time, their plan was much, much bigger. Okay, this is where it gets really, really interesting. Because Huawei didn't just make a sub-brand, they built it into this perfectly seamless, market-destroying machine. So look at this. This is Huawei's master plan. They used their two brands to create what you could call a gradient across the entire market. You had Honor, covering everything from low-end to mid-range, and then the main Huawei brand took over from the mid-range to the high-end. You see that overlap in the middle? That's the secret sauce. No matter how much money you had to spend, there was a phone from the Huawei family waiting for you. Now, let's flip over to Xiaomi's setup. See the difference? It's totally lopsided. Redmi absolutely owned the low end of the market, but there was this huge jump in both price and in perception to get from a cheap Redmi to a more premium Xiaomi phone. So if you were a happy Redmi customer, it was actually really hard to upgrade and stay in the family. It just felt like too big of a leap. And why does that upgrade path matter so much? Well, it all comes down to loyalty. I mean, the real test for any brand isn't selling you one phone, it's whether you come back for another one. And in this business, we measure that with something called the retention rate. Basically, what percentage of your customers stick with you when it's time to upgrade. So if you just look at the raw numbers for individual brands, it's no surprise. Apple is the king of keeping its customers, with a retention rate of almost 53%. But check out Huawei, coming in at a crazy impressive 48.5%, a strong second place. Xiaomi, you'll see, is a bit further down. But wait, this is where the magic of the sub-brand strategy pays off big time. Because what happens when you treat Huawei and Honor as one big family? When you count a customer who upgrades from an Honor to a Huawei as a loyal customer, well, their combined retention rate shoots up to over 53%. Let that sink in. In China, thanks to this brilliant gradient strategy, the Huawei family was actually better at keeping its customers than Apple. That's just staggering. So, Huawei had built this incredible, seemingly unstoppable empire, perfectly designed to dominate its home turf. But then a massive curveball came from completely outside the country that would shake the whole company right to its foundations. U.S. sanctions hit them where it hurt the most. It cut them off from being able to manufacture their own custom-designed Kirin chips. And this chip wasn't just some component. This was their secret sauce. It's what let them get Apple-like performance at a better price. Without it, their biggest hardware advantage, poof, gone. The situation got so bad that there were reports that Huawei might have to sell off Honor, the very key to their success at home. And that leaves us with this huge question. Selling Honor wouldn't just be selling a division, it would be ripping out the heart of the very strategy that let them conquer their market in the first place. It could literally reset the clock back to 2011. So, with Huawei's secret weapon potentially gone, could the high-end rocket in China become a one-horse race for Apple all over again? The whole game has been turned upside down, and what happens next is truly anyone's guess.